The smell of red chile hung in the air, drifting from the pot that simmered on my stove. My kitchen in South Capitol had always been the place where Sundays felt whole. The vegan above carried the laughter of my grandchildren. Daniel and Sophia, as they sprawled across the table, drawing crooked suns and houses with crayons. I turned the tortillas on the commel, the rhythm of the spatula familiar grounding for a moment. It seemed like any other Sunday. Then Sable walked in from the living room. Her steps were sharp, her jaw tight. I recognized that look before she spoke, but I still wasn't ready for the words. "Stop controlling us with your money." The room fell still. The only sound was the hiss of the pan. I froze, tortilla in hand. Unsure if I had heard correctly, Daniel's crayon paused mid-line. Sophia clutched her doll to her chest. I turned toward Caspian, expecting him to speak up to tell her she was out of line. Instead, he studied the floor like it held the answer he couldn't give me. Then softly, without lifting his eyes, he said, "We want you in a nursing home." The words cut deeper than any knife. I gripped the counter to steady myself. It was as if the plaster walls themselves shuddered. Rejecting the cruelty spoken inside them, my chest tightened. I searched Caspian's face for something remorse. Hesitation, anything, but found only a boyish discomfort. The same look he wore when he broke a window as a child and waited for me to scold him. Now he was a grown man, yet still hiding behind silence. Daniel looked between us with wide eyes, not understanding why his father's voice made me tremble. Sophia whimpered. The doll pressed against her cheek. I set the tortilla down, wiped my hands on the apron, and pulled my shawl around my shoulders. My throat burned, but I forced the words out evenly. Understood. I kissed the children's heads, the only warmth I could bear to give, and stepped into the cold night air. The high desert wind met me like an old companion. As I began walking toward the river, the echoes of their voices following close behind. The cold air stung my cheeks as I left the house behind. South Capitol streets were quiet, adobe walls glowing faintly under the streetlights. I walked until I reached the path along the Santa Fe River, where the water trickled thin and steady. A winter thread through the cottonwoods, the crunch of gravel under my shoes was the only sound that kept me company. I replayed Sable's words as though they were etched into the night, controlling with my money. The phrase gnawed at me. My mind traveled back to the countless times I had reached into my purse, not to control, but to protect. When Caspian's old Ford sputtered on Sirio's road, it was my checkbook that saved him from losing workdays. When Daniel needed tuition for his charter school, I signed the forms without hesitation. When Sophia outgrew her shoes in the middle of winter, I bought her a pair lined with fleece so her toes would stay warm on the frosty playground. Were these shackles? Was love a leash simply because it came with receipts? I thought of Raoul, steady and soft-spoken, who used to say, "We give so they can rise higher than we did." He would never have called it control. He would have reminded me that sacrifice was the way we survived, that sharing was the root of family. Yet here I was, accused of chaining my own son and his wife with the very rope I thought would steady them. The river curved in silence, and I pressed my shawl closer around me. If I stopped helping, they would stumble. If I continued, I was a tyrant. I felt trapped between eraser and accusation, both cutting me in different ways. I walked on until the lights of the rail yard glowed ahead, and I knew I couldn't carry this alone. Petra's house in El Dorado was only a short drive away, and she would give me words sharp enough to cut through the fog after Raoul died. The house felt like an empty drum echoing with everything he used to be. His jacket still hung on the peg by the door. His rosary lay on the nightstand. His scent lingered in the folds of my shawl. The silence was unbearable, but the paperwork came quickly. Life insurance bank accounts, letters from companies reminding me of balances due. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with the check from the insurance company in my hand. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to let me live quietly for the rest of my years if I stayed frugal. Instead, I thought of Caspian and his young family. At that time, they were renting a cramped unit off St. Michael's Drive, where the paint peeled and the neighbors shouted at each other through thin walls. Daniel was just learning to ride a bike, and Sophia was still in diapers. I told myself children deserved grass safety and light. That was when I found the condo near the Railard. It was modest by neighborhood standards, but secure gated parking, a courtyard where children could play close to schools walking distance to the plaza. I toured it alone, hand trembling, as I touched the cool adobe walls. It felt like a promise I could make good on. I emptied my savings account, added Raoul's insurance payout, and signed every page the title officer slid across the desk. When the deed was transferred, I asked that it be put in Caspian's name. I told myself it would help him feel like the head of his household, that it would give him dignity in front of his wife. I swallowed the truth that the cost had been everything I owned. I never said a word to them. I wanted them to believe it had been easy for me, that my strength was bottomless. But each time I walked past that building, watching Daniel and Sophia race across the courtyard, I felt both proud and hollow. And now, those same walls stood as proof they believed I had only used money to control them. A thought I carried with me as I drove toward Petra's house in El Dorado. Petra's adobe home in El Dorado glowed with lamplight when I pulled into her driveway. The night air was colder out here, the desert stretching wide beyond the clustered houses. She opened the door before I knocked, as if she had been waiting with her sharp eyes and sharper words. I barely finished telling her what had happened before she flared. "You gave everything, and they spit it back in your face." Her voice was rough with outrage, hands planted on her hips. "Raoul's money, your savings, your peace of mind. You poured it all into them, and now they want to throw you in a home." I tried to quiet her, but she shook her head fiercely. "No, Ellen, enough. You can't keep buying their love." "That's not love. That's servitude." Her words seared, but it was the truth underneath that burned deepest. She had always seen through me. I sat at her table, the scent of sage tea filling the room, and whispered, "I only wanted them to feel safe." Petra softened for a moment, then leaned closer. "I know, but when you hover, it's not safety they see. It's fear. And fear looks like control to people who don't understand sacrifice." The phrase cut me open. Hovering. Fear. Was that what Sable saw each time I offered help, a frightened woman clinging too tightly? Petra reached across the table, pressing her hand on mine. "You need boundaries, and you need a lawyer. Don't wait for them to decide your worth." I swallowed hard, staring into her steady gaze. My heart trembled, but I felt a spark flicker where shame had been. The next morning, I drove back into town with a name Petra had written on a scrap of paper. Marine Auto Attorney at Law. Marine Auto's office sat in a quiet adobe near the courthouse, its shelves stacked with casebooks and photographs of Santa Fe landscapes. I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap, as I told him everything from Raoul's insurance money to the day I signed the deed over to Caspian. I spoke slowly, each detail feeling like a confession. When I finished, Marin leaned back, thoughtful legally. "The title is in your son's name. That means on paper it's his. But the money that purchased it was yours. And courts recognize that. It's called a purchase money resulting trust. Essentially, the law can presume you never meant it as a gift, but held an equitable interest." I blinked at him, The term's foreign, but the meaning sharp. So I can take it back. He shook his head gently. Not quite that simple. You can demand reimbursement or force a sale, but it would take a court order if he refuses. That means filings, discovery, perhaps even a trial. And trials are expensive. It's also slow months, possibly more than a year. My stomach sank. I imagined the courthouse halls, the coldness of a judge, the family fractures laid bare in public. Marin must have seen my hesitation, but he continued. The fact that you can do it gives you leverage. If he knows you're willing to act, he may cooperate rather than fight. We can prepare a demand letter, explain the claim clearly, and open the door for negotiation. I felt heat rise in my chest, the sting of humiliation battling with the steadiness of resolve. Caspian would see that I wasn't powerless. I hadn't wanted to fight, but perhaps fighting was the only language left. Marin slid a packet of papers across the desk. This authorizes me to represent you. I'll begin drafting the demand immediately. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I thought of Raoul, of the vows we made to protect our family, of the countless nights I believed sacrifice would be enough. Then I pressed the pen to the page and signed my name with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. When I stepped back into the crisp air, I clutched the folder against my chest. The path ahead would be costly, but so was silence, and I had already paid enough. I drove home the letter of intent in my bag. Knowing the next step would bring Caspian face to face with the truth, I called Caspian the next morning, my voice steady, though my hand trembled around the phone. Come to the house. We need to talk. He hesitated, but agreed. By evening, he was at my door, his shoulders slouched, the same posture he had as a boy when he knew he was in trouble. I led him into the living room. The coffee table was cleared of everything except a neat stack of papers. Marin's draft settlement letter lay on top, the black print sharp against the cream page. Caspian's eyes flicked toward it, then quickly away, as though the words themselves burned. I sat down and gestured for him to do the same. This is what I'm prepared to do, I said. My voice did not rise, though my heart beat heavy in my chest. The condo will be sold. The proceeds will return to me, less a portion set aside for Daniel and Sophia's education. That way, they are not punished for the choices made above them. He shook his head, his face pale. Mom, you can't. The kids' school is right there. Sable has her community. This is our home. Please just give us time. We'll figure this out. I folded my hands in my lap. Caspian, you told me you wanted nothing from me. Those were your words. If that is true, you cannot live inside what is mine. He stared at me, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, he managed. It was Sable talking, not me. She was angry. You know how she gets. I didn't mean it that way. I leaned forward, locking my gaze with his. You said it too. Maybe softer, but you said it. And now you will live with the truth of it. He pressed his palms against his knees, the same nervous tick he'd had since childhood. Just a little more time. Please, I rose, gathering the papers into a folder. Time will not change what's written here. Decide quickly. Caspian, I won't wait forever. The silence between us stretched thin as glass, and I knew it would not be long before Sable's anger began to crack that glass apart. Within a week, Caspian called me late at night, his voice tight. He and Sable had toured 3 rentals in Santa Fe, all of them overpriced, all of them too small. Even the duplexes out on Airport Road stretched beyond his salary. He sounded exhausted, worn down by numbers that refused to bend. The next day, Sable showed up at my house without warning. Her cheeks were flushed, her words sharp. You're tearing this family apart. Do you even care what this does to Daniel and Sophia? I stood quietly, letting her anger wash over me. I had no wish to fight. But then her voice cracked. Do you know what it's like to grow up with nothing? To never own a bed that's yours? To have strangers decide where you live every few months? That's my childhood. Foster homes. Rules I never asked for. People making decisions over me. So yes, when you pay for everything, I feel like I'm back there trapped. For a moment, I saw the woman beneath the armor. The girl who had once carried her belongings in a trash bag from house to house. My heart softened, but her next words hardened it again. I won't be chained by your money. Not ever. She turned on her heel before I could answer, slamming the door behind her. Later, I heard she was staying with a friend off Cerrillos Road, telling people she needed space. Caspian came by alone that weekend. The children in tow, his eyes were ringed with fatigue. His shirt wrinkled as if he hadn't cared enough to iron. He didn't speak much, but his silence told me everything. The burden of rent, of children, of a fractured marriage. He carried it now without her shield. I served the children supper, while Caspian sat at the table, staring at nothing. And in his stillness, I recognized the weight of choices, pressing down choices that could no longer be shifted onto me. The cracks in their marriage had widened into fault lines, and I knew soon one of them would break completely. Caspian arrived on a Saturday morning with Daniel and Sophia tugging at his hands. Their faces brightened when they saw me, and they ran inside, filling the rooms with laughter that had been missing for weeks. Caspian lingered at the doorway, shoulder-slumped eyes heavy with sleeplessness. He followed me into the kitchen where the smell of beans simmering filled the air. I set bowls in front of the children, then waited. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he lowered himself into Raoul's old chair, the same one he had once climbed as a boy, when his feet barely touched the floor. Finally, his voice cracked. Mom, I need to say this. I was a coward. His hands trembled as he pressed them against his face. When Sable said those things, I let her. I stayed silent because I didn't want to fight with her. But in doing that, I betrayed you. His words spilled out raw and halting. He remembered the nights I skipped supper so he could eat more. The shirts I mended so he could walk into school with dignity. The mornings I walked to 2 jobs so he could go to college. His tears dotted the table, darkening the wood. I let her humiliate you in your own home, he whispered. And I did nothing. Forgive me. I sat across from him, the weight of years between us. My throat ached with everything I wanted to say, but I steadied my voice. Respect is not fear. Caspian, it is recognition. You hid because you were afraid of her anger. But fear will never be enough. Not for me, not for you, not for your children. He lifted his head, eyes swollen, searching for an answer I could not give so easily. I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. I forgive the man sitting in front of me, but I cannot forgive the pattern that put me here. That has to change. The children's laughter echoed from the next room, fragile and pure, as though they were reminding us what was truly at stake. Sable came back one evening when the sky was strewn with crimson over the Sangre de Cristo mountains. She stepped into my house without ceremony, her eyes darting to the children before landing on Caspian. I want to talk, she said flatly. Caspian stood by the counter, hands braced as if steadying himself against the weight of what was coming. Then talk, her voice softened, a rehearsed calm. We can work this out. We'll move. We'll adjust. But I can't live under your mother's shadow, not with her questioning every choice. I opened my mouth, but Caspian lifted his hand. No, Sable. This isn't her speaking. This is me. He stepped closer, his voice firm in a way I had not heard in years. If you cannot respect my mother, you cannot stay in this marriage. She is part of this family. That will not change. Sable's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she might unleash the storm I had seen so many times before. But instead, she looked away, her breath catching in her throat. She walked down the hallway, returned with a small bag she must have packed earlier, and faced him with dry eyes. "Then I'll go." The words were bare, almost tender in their finality. She bent to kiss Sophia's head, brushed Daniel's cheek, and left without looking back. The door shut quietly. No slam, no curse, only silence. Heavier than any shouting could have been. Caspian sank into a chair, his hands covering his face while the children crawled into my lap. Confused but clinging, I held them close, feeling the fragile shift of a family reshaping itself, and knew the next step would demand more strength than any of us had yet shown. The papers were signed in Marino's office, the ink drying, as Caspian handed the pen back with a quiet nod. He didn't argue. He didn't stall. He accepted that the condo would be sold. Within weeks, the listing drew buyers eager for a foothold near the Railard, and soon the contract closed. Most of the funds came back to me, a return of the savings and insurance I had once poured out without hesitation. A portion was placed in a trust for Daniel and Sophia secured, so their education would not be bound by pride or resentment. It was written into law beyond the reach of temper or manipulation. With the settlement finalized, I found a modest adobe casita near South Capitol. The walls were simple, the garden small, but the place was mine. I planted herbs by the doorway, rosemary and mint that perfumed the air when the sun warmed them. Inside, I placed Raoul's rosary on the nightstand, a reminder that love given freely is never wasted. I kept my little alteration shop by the Railard, hemmed dresses, stitched jackets, and greeted neighbors who valued me for my craft, not my purse. The rhythm of work steadied me, each thread drawn firm and clean. Sundays became mine again. Daniel and Sophia came running through the gate, their laughter filling the courtyard. Caspian helped with dishes, his voice quieter now, but stronger in its respect. He no longer avoided my gaze. As I locked the door each night, the key pressed cool against my palm. I knew it was not just a key to a house. It was a key to dignity, to boundaries, to peace. It was the only key I needed to carry forward.